Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Ray. I'm a detransition male, and today we're going to be wading into the "Was Kurt Cobain trans?" discourse. So I want to start us off with this clip here, this very interesting interview from Kurt Cobain. So let's see what Kurt has to say.
I personally like to wear dresses, and I wear them around the house sometimes, so whatever.
Okay, so I really like this clip. I think it's very interesting, and I'm gonna zoom in on the part about him wearing the dresses around the house because I think the around the house is very interesting, coupled with the fact that he kind of has this like embarrassed grin about it when he says it. You can definitely tell he's a little bit like shy or embarrassed, and he's wearing dresses around the house, like not out, in regular life, but specifically around the house. So I'm going to come back to this because I think it is important. But the whole discourse started from this post here on Twitter, and I know this discourse has been around for a while. This isn't necessarily new or anything. It just kind of got like kicked off recently because of this trans person posted this thing here, this picture of Kurt Cobain in a dress. Says that is a trans girl, and then obviously it pissed off a bunch of people wearing eyeliner. So people are saying that they're transing gender nonconforming people. It's just Kurt Cobain being Kurt Cobain. He was wearing a dress to mock gender norms. Now men wear dresses and claim that makes them a woman. So you agree trans women are just men in dresses? That is a guy wearing a dress and eyeliner. Stop trying to make everyone trans. Gender identity doesn't equal stereotypes. Stop, trans people try not to enforce gender stereotypes. Challenge impossible. OMG, a man not conforming to gender norms must be trans. Just a man in a dress. Okay, so that's a pretty common response, and then obviously there are some trans people who agree with this. Okay, so why, besides wearing a dress, it's not just the dress. This is just one thing. But why would a trans woman, or why would a trans person think that Kurt Cobain was trans? Well, it's more than just this photo. It's more than just the dress wearing. So I found this Reddit thread. Of course, this is not like the most well researched source ever, so apologies, but I thought this was interesting. I was trying to do some digging on this and I found this. So he frequently wore women's clothes. He thought he was gay and then bi and then straight. He cross-dressed a lot with Courtney, and she wrote "Beautiful Son" about him. And it's his picture on the single. He had clear, very strong body dysmorphia and often described himself as sickly and feminine. In his published journals and some unused lyrics for "Dumb," he wrote, "I'm not a man," and in all apologies wrote about growing breasts. He was an avid feminist who described himself as gay in spirit. He risked commercial blowback to stand up for queer folks at a time when that was very risky. Rejected typical masculine things and embraced feminine things as a kid. At one point said he felt closer to the feminine side of human being than male. There's a lot more bullshit that makes him seem like he might have been trying to navigate dysphoria, but whatever. Anyway, and it's my opinion that all apologies and radio-friendly unit shifter may be angsty trans femme lesbian spectrum egg anthems. So here's like another article I found. Was Kurt Cobain trans? So in interviews, he spoke of being confused regarding his sexuality because of how deeply he related to girls. Yeah, I even thought I was gay. I thought that might be the solution to my problem. So this idea about deeply relating to girls, I think this is very interesting. I'm going to come back to this later. The mistaken belief that femininity would mean he was gay makes sense within the strict view of gender norms when he was growing up. And the way he rationalized it in the 90s has not evolved much. It is a part of him he has tried to make peace with, but is still more intimate than external appearance. Throughout my life, I've always been really close with girls and made friends with girls, and I've always been a really sickly, feminine person, anyhow. So I thought I was gay for a while because I didn't find any of the girls in my high school attractive at all. Okay, so he's obsessed with like male seahorses giving birth. The male seahorse carries the children and gives them birth. So that's always been kind of like a trans theme. The song Been a Son includes the lyrics, She should have been a son, and the way it repeats a striking similarity to the later song True Trans Soul Rebel by trans woman Laura Jane Grace. Okay, the song You Know You're Right similarly contains the lyrics, She just wants to love himself. Many of Kurt's songs appear to be conversational between male and female personas, the male aspects taking on more negative qualities. I definitely feel closer to the feminine side of the human being than I do the male or the American idea of what a male is supposed to be. He always refers to himself as male, not a man, and also writes about wishing he had breasts, the most obvious sign of gender dysphoria within his writing. Let me grow some breasts. This is from like a journal article. Here he mentions his breast lactating and adds that he continued to enjoy playing with dolls while his peers were undergoing puberty. I'm lactating at 23. He's a male. My breasts have never been so sore. Stopped playing with dolls. Okay, so we can never truly know how he might have identified, which is fitting with the quote, I'm not a man. I'm a miserable pile of secrets. Okay, so let's watch one more clip and then we're going to get into my analysis.
That doesn't mean we can't speculate. This is a good point. Kurt never transitioned, obviously. He never came out. And we should respect everyone's pronouns that they use. So, like, he, him for Kurt, obviously. But that doesn't mean we can't speculate on whether or not Kurt had gender dysphoria or had the desire to transition, whether or not he had the intent. He certainly did and said a lot of things that people who later go on to transition do and say. That doesn't necessarily, of course, mean he was trans, but all I'm saying is he did a lot of trans stuff. That's all I'm saying.
Okay.
Wear dresses, and I wear them around the house sometimes, so whatever.
Okay. So I want to talk about this wearing dresses around the house because here is my theory. Kurt was not trans. He was AGP. He was autogynephilic. The wearing the dresses around the house is a very common sign of autogynephilia, and the wishing he would grow breasts, being feminine, playing with dolls, the sort of like embarrassed look he has when he says he wears dresses around the house. Because if he was just a regular gender nonconforming 90s grunge, gender bender, it wouldn't be like around the house. Like he specifically said he wears them around the house. Well, that's what AGPs do. An AGP is an autogynephile who gets aroused by the thought of themselves as a woman. And they're particularly interested, or a lot of them are particularly interested in things like growing breasts and wearing dresses and doing so around the house because that fits into the private life. And it's like a sexual thing. And that's why people are embarrassed about it. But here's the thing, like this whole discourse about like, well, was he trans? Was he not trans? No, he wasn't trans because he never called himself trans, but he was AGP. And this is the thing, or at least I'm speculating that he's AGP, but this is the thing. It's like people think the question of like, are you trans or are you not trans? It's like black and white. Well, for me, you can be AGP and never take on the trans identity. The trans identity is always optional when it comes to dealing with your AGP. There's many ways to deal with your AGP. You can sort of compartmentalize it. You can integrate it into your male identity in a healthy way, or you can fully embrace it and indulge it and transition, go on hormones, change your name, change your pronouns, change your whole social life, get a legal name change. Like, you can upset your entire life to give into this feminine identity, take on the trans identity, call yourself a trans woman. That is the most extreme way to deal with these feelings. But just having the feelings themselves is different from being trans, because being trans means you have consciously chosen the label and the identity of trans, applied it to yourself, and said, this is the best word to make sense of my life. And usually, when AGPs do that, it is a sort of cover for the fact that they want to go on and transition, socially transition, take hormones, get surgery. And just saying I'm an AGP cross-dressing male is often not the right narrative that trans women use when they go on hormones and get their surgeries, because they got to go, get these letters from the professionals. They got to go through the gatekeeping process. And typically it's easier to go through the gatekeeping process when you say, like, oh, I have gender dysphoria. I've been a girl since I was 5 years old. I'm like, have this true, authentic self. I've always been like this. I'm born in the wrong body. Like, that is a lot more socially acceptable than saying, I'm AGP. This is like a sex thing. It's a kink thing. I've always felt like this. I've always had these desires, but it has its roots in the erotic. Well, this is why this question of, like, oh, well, was he trans or not? It's sort of besides the point. For me, the more important question is, did he show signs of AGP or not? And then the second question is, okay, well, given that he shows signs of AGP and he's likely AGP, does that mean that, his life would have been better if he had taken on a trans identity? Well, not necessarily. Um, because that's the thing I always say, is that the trans identity is, it's optional. It's not a necessary entailment of having AGP. Like, you can be AGP, recognize yourself as male, say, I'm male, I have AGP, and then you can choose to adopt the trans identity or not. You can choose to transition or not. Like, being trans is a choice, because what does it mean to be trans? Like, being trans means you not just have these AGP feelings, but you've consciously chosen to adopt the trans identity for yourself. Like, that's what it means. You have chosen that label and said, I choose this label. This is the best label for me. And but the feelings themselves, the desires themselves, like the desire to cross dress, the desire for breasts, like, you don't choose that. You don't choose your desires, but you do choose which labels to use for yourself. And depending on the severity of these desires, choosing the trans identity, might be the right choice, particularly if you want a more socially acceptable narrative that you can use to justify your decision to socially transition, change your name, change your pronouns, go on hormones, get surgery, get all this stuff. Like, typically, this is why trans women reject the autogynephilic theory, because it's not as socially acceptable of a narrative versus saying, I have a true, authentic self buried deep inside of me. And I've always had this true, authentic self buried deep inside of me since I was like 5 years old. And this is what explains, my whole secretive life of being like a cross dresser. Because, let's not forget
I
that
personally like to wear dresses, and I wear them around the house sometimes, so.
he likes to wear them around the house sometimes. That is an AGP thing. And so the question is, like, not whether he was trans, because clearly he wasn't trans, because he never took on the trans label for himself, but he liked to wear dresses around the house. That is classic AGP. So, but the question of, like, in today's day and age, this whole discourse around like, oh well, he's gender nonconforming, he's not trans, like oh you like you put on a dress and you're automatically trans. Well, yes, I agree with this critique. The mere fact of being gender nonconforming, the mere fact of wearing a dress and wearing eyeliner and all this stuff, like that does not mean you're trans, but it is a very good indicator that you are AGP. And AGP is it is the most common pathway to the causal etiology, the development, the causal origins, the roots of where gender dysphoria in trans women comes from, particularly if you are not exclusively attracted to men, because Kurt was not exclusively attracted to men. And so, therefore, he was likely an autogynephile because these desires, these thoughts, this thought pattern, this inversion of heterosexuality. I mean, the these like essays or these like posters saying, he really identified with being feminine. Um, he was like deeply related to girls. This deep relation to girls, that is the AGP. That is the sensitive, empathic internalization of that is the inversion of the heterosexuality. It's the classic AGP. I'm a like when you're AGP, you're attracted to women, but you often have this question of like, am I attracted to that woman or do I want to be that woman? Like it's that dichotomy between I'm a deeply attracted to you and I relate to you, but I also want to be you. That is the classic AGP like dichotomy, and it seems very clear that Kurt experienced that and he thought he was gay. Well, that's because he was having these AGP thoughts. The AGP thoughts like make you think that you're gay. That's like meta attraction, pseudo bisexuality. But really he's, attracted to femininity. Um, deeply related to girls. He's a sickly feminine person. So I don't know. I just think this discourse is a little too black and white. It's like, oh, you're either trans or you're not trans. For me, the question of trans is like it's more about it's like a choice about how you identify. But the AGP is the real underlying cause, but the trans community doesn't want to admit that. And the gender critical community is like in denial that this person could be AGP. They think, oh, like he's just a queer punk rocker, gender nonconforming, like messing with gender bending because that's just what rockers did back then. No, like like he was probably AGP, and that was the underlying cause of the gender nonconformity. Um, and yes, like just having AGP doesn't mean you have to think that you're a woman. Like being AGP, being male, and being a crossdresser doesn't mean you're a woman. Doesn't mean you have to take on the identity of a woman. But let's not stick our heads in the sand and like refuse to acknowledge that this sort of AGP underlying thought pattern is what is the causal origins of most gender dysphoria in trans women. So even though, yes, he wasn't trans, he didn't take on the trans identity, he didn't identify as a woman, he still had the same underlying pattern of AGP that is the origins of most gender dysphoria in quote unquote real trans women. It's the same thing. And this is why trans women relate to Kurt Cobain because they can see that. They can see themselves in his story. Why? Because they are also AGP. Okay, so that's all I wanted to say about this. Thanks for watching. Take care.